Friends, if you're a true horror lover and want to experience a night you'll never forget, then you must like this video right now. And if you've just stumbled onto our creepy little corner for the first time, welcome to the nightmare. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button before the loop resets. In today's bone-chilling video, we're diving deep into the terrifying world of Until Dawn 2025, a brand new horror film that's already sending shivers down spines. We'll uncover what this movie is all about, where you can watch it, and all the twisted details behind the scenes. I'll be telling you everything, from which OTT platform or satellite channel will be showing this blood-soaked tale, to juicy facts about its production, haunting soundtrack, pre-production nightmares, post-production magic, filming locations, budget, and yes, even its box office numbers once they start rolling in. But wait, that's not all. We'll dissect the storyline, break down the performances of this talented cast, reveal who played what spine-tingling role, and give you a spoiler-free mini-review of the plot that loops and loops and loops. And of course, no horror breakdown would be complete without some shocking behind-the-scenes facts, Easter eggs from the original Until Dawn video game, and our honest thoughts on whether this movie is worth surviving the night for. So grab your flashlight, stay close to your group, and don't fall asleep, because once the night begins, there's no escape until dawn. Let's begin. In the 2025 film Until Dawn, director David F. Sandberg crafts a chilling narrative that transcends conventional horror storytelling. Departing from the original game's plot, the film introduces a new set of characters and a unique storyline, while preserving the essence of the Until Dawn universe. The premise. The story centers on Clover, portrayed by Ella Rubin, who, along with her friends, ventures into a remote valley to investigate the mysterious disappearance of her sister Melanie. Their exploration leads them to an abandoned visitor center, where they encounter a masked killer who begins to eliminate them one by one. However, death is not the end. The group finds themselves trapped in a time loop, reliving the same night repeatedly, each iteration presenting a new and more terrifying threat. Narrative structure and themes. The film employs a non-linear narrative structure, utilizing the time loop as a device to explore various horror subgenres. Each loop immerses the characters in a different horror scenario, ranging from slasher and supernatural to body horror and found footage, thereby keeping the audience in a constant state of suspense and unpredictability. This approach allows for a multifaceted exploration of fear, as the characters confront diverse manifestations of horror. Character dynamics and emotional impact. As the loops progress, the characters' psychological states deteriorate, revealing deeper layers of their personalities and relationships. The repeated exposure to trauma and the looming threat of permanent death intensify their desperation and fear. The film delves into themes of survival, the human psyche under duress, and the bonds that either strengthen or fracture under extreme stress. Cinematic techniques. Sandberg's direction, combined with Maxime Alexander's cinematography and Benjamin Wallfish's haunting score, creates an immersive atmosphere that heightens the tension and horror. The film's visual and auditory elements work in tandem to evoke a visceral response, drawing the audience into the characters' harrowing experiences. Conclusion. Until Dawn 2025 stands as a testament to innovative horror filmmaking, blending psychological depth with genre-spanning terror. Its use of a time loop not only serves as a narrative mechanism, but also as a means to explore the multifaceted nature of fear and human resilience. The film challenges viewers to confront the unknown and question the limits of survival when faced with relentless horror. In Until Dawn 2025, character development is not a luxury, it's the core of survival. With each loop, the film peels back emotional and psychological layers from its characters like skin from bone, exposing hidden truths, frayed loyalties, and suppressed guilt. What begins as a group of archetypal horror movie friends, a skeptic, a romantic, a rebel, a protector, gradually morphs into something deeper and darker. Director David F. Sandberg uses the time loop mechanic not just as a plot device, but as a scalpel to dissect human behavior under escalating stress. Let's enter the loop and examine how these characters evolve, not linearly, but chaotically, mirroring the film's fractured timeline and crumbling sense of self.
Clover, Ella Rubin, The Anchor of Obsession and Grief.
Clover starts as the most grounded, the one who still holds onto a thread of rational hope. Her motivation is clear from the outset. Find out what happened to her sister, Melanie. But grief is a treacherous motivator. As the loops multiply, Clover's arc transforms from innocent seeker into an obsessive truth hunter, almost martyr-like in her desperation. Initially, she's cautious, collaborative. But as her memories of Melanie start blending with hallucinations, or perhaps messages from beyond, her emotional stability begins to unravel. One of the film's most harrowing scenes is a loop where she chooses not to warn her friends just to test if their deaths reveal any new clues. That cold calculus fractures her relationships, especially with
Evan, Michael Cimino, de Moral Campes, cracking.
Evan is Clover's closest friend, and possibly something more, but he resists the loop's logic far longer than anyone else. He clings to a moral code, insisting they stay human even in the face of repeated deaths. His first few arcs are marked by frustration and disbelief, but as the trauma compounds, Evan becomes hollowed out, torn between his desire to save Clover and the unbearable weight of watching everyone die again and again. One of the most emotionally gutting moments is when Evan breaks down, not from physical harm, but from the realization that he's beginning to forget what the original night even looked like. His moral compass doesn't break all at once. It erodes quietly, until by loop 12, he's willing to do things that early Evan would have called monstrous.
Sky, Odessa Acción, de Chaos Agent.
Sky starts off as the brash, sarcastic rebel, the one who jokes through tension, who picks fights just to feel something. But until Dawn refuses to leave her in stereotype. Over time, Sky reveals a survivalist's logic beneath her bravado. She is the first to weaponize the loop, experimenting with movement patterns, psychological manipulation, even sabotage. Her arc becomes one of controlled chaos, trying to hack the horror, bend the rules. But there's a cost. In one loop, Sky survives alone by betraying the group. She spends the next loop trying to undo the emotional fallout, only to discover that trust once broken is not easily repaired. Her dynamic with Maya Mitchell's character, Jules, evolves from shallow animosity to a raw, vulnerable bond that's as doomed as the night itself. Jules, Maya Mitchell, the passive heart turned catalyst. Jules begins as the quiet one, the empath, the type whose narrative purpose seems to be the one who dies early and inspires grief. But Sandberg plays against expectation.
Jules doente die early.
She keeps surviving through loops, often by chance or other people's sacrifice. The longer she lives, the more guilt eats at her, until it calcifies into resolve. Jules' arc is about agency. In loop after loop, she goes from passive observer to active participant, and ultimately to someone who makes an irreversible decision, one that alters the loop's rules entirely. Her shift is slow and painful, and it becomes one of the emotional pillars of the film, that quiet endurance is not weakness, and that sometimes the last to act are the ones who carry the heaviest burden. Noah, Belmont Cameli, the denier turned believer. Noah is the comic relief at first, a skeptic who thinks the horror is an elaborate prank or Clover's trauma-induced delusion. His jokes provide early levity, but they mask a deep-seated fear of powerlessness. Once he realizes the loops are real, Noah spirals fast.
His humor dries up.
He becomes paranoid, erratic, convinced the killer is a manifestation of their own guilt. Noah's trajectory is one of mental disintegration, a character study in what happens when belief arrives too late. He becomes obsessed with the idea that if he dies in a certain way, sacrificial, heroic, it might end the cycle. One loop ends with him deliberately walking into the killer's path with arms wide open, whispering, "Let it be me."
The loop resets anyway. Lina, Hyung-jo, the observer who understands the system.
Lina is the group's most enigmatic member, quiet, highly perceptive, but emotionally distant. She begins as a side character, often in the background, watching. But she's not passive. She's studying the loop, the patterns, the geography. In one of the most striking loops, it's revealed that Lina has been tracking every single reset in a notebook that only she remembers to carry. She theorizes that the loop is responding to them, evolving based on their emotional states and choices. This revelation adds a metaphysical layer to the narrative. Lena becomes a kind of prophet figure, suggesting the horror isn't just random violence, it's a reflection of them. Her arc is not about emotion, but revelation. And when she disappears in a loop without dying, something no one has done, her absence becomes more haunting than any on-screen kill. Relational tension, fractures, bonds, and rot. The loops do something horrifying to relationships. They reveal what people are capable of, and what they're willing to forgive. Betrayals accumulate. Trust is hoarded. Love is weaponized. Secrets are exposed not by confession, but by repetition. One character hears another whisper a confession in a dying breath, and uses that knowledge 2 loops later to manipulate them. Another couple breaks up, reconciles, and breaks again, all in the span of an hour. No bond remains intact by the end. Even the most heartfelt moments, Evan holding Clover as she sobs over her sister's last message, are tinged with futility. Because they know, they will lose this moment in the next loop. Or worse, remember it and never experience it again.
Transformations that can't be undone.
Ultimately, these arcs are not about survival, they are about transformation, and not the comforting kind.
No one leaves the loop unchanged.
Some become colder. Others become braver. Most become strangers to themselves. The true horror of Until Dawn lies in watching people you care about slowly transform into versions of themselves that no longer remember how to be whole. And even as the loops reset the night, the characters carry something over, a twitch in the eye, a tremble in the voice, a decision they almost remember making. The audience, like the characters, begins to ask, what will be left of us when it finally ends? In Until Dawn, character isn't backstory. It's erosion, evolution, and the echo of who we used to be.
Repeating like a broken clock until nothing is familiar anymore.
In Until Dawn, 2025, the performances don't just complement the horror. They infuse it with breath, fragility, and fire. This isn't a film where screams and blood are the only emotional notes. The cast, anchored by a blend of emerging talent and seasoned presence, transforms what could have been a stylish slasher into a psychological pressure cooker, fueled by grief, guilt, and the slow bleed of sanity.
Ella Rubin as Clover, the art of grief made flesh.
Ella Rubin doesn't perform grief, she inhabits it. From her first scene, where she stands quietly in the place her sister vanished, her body language tells us more than any monologue could. Her portrayal of Clover is all about restraint slowly cracking. Rubin threads each loop with subtle shifts, a tighter jawline, a slightly more frantic pace, a voice that gets thinner as her hope corrodes. Her standout scene is not a scream or a sprint from danger. It's when Clover watches her friends die again, and this time, does nothing.
Rubin do entenitears to break your heart. She just stares blankly, letting the horror of numbness do all the work.
As the loops wear on, she moves like someone sleepwalking through a nightmare she knows she can't wake from. And when she finally turns desperate, screaming into the woods, clawing at the sky, Rubin unleashes a rawness that jolts the viewer into empathy. She makes Clover haunt the story.
Michael Cimino as Evan de Moral Soul, slowly frying.
Michael Cimino gives Evan a warmth that is utterly human. He's the glue early on, the one who tries to hold everyone together. But as time fractures around them, Cimino's performance shifts in controlled increments. His smile, once sincere, becomes a shield. His voice, once firm, begins to shake. You see the toll of repetition in his eyes long before he speaks it aloud. Cimino's most devastating moments come when Evan can no longer pretend to be the good guy, not because he's done anything wrong, but because the rules have changed and goodness no longer guarantees survival. There's a loop where he refuses to sacrifice anyone else, and dies horribly for it. Then there's another where he makes the sacrifice, and survives.
Cimino por tras de moral disonance with chilling precision.
His performance becomes a study in emotional erosion. Odessa Asian as Sky, ferocity with fractures. Odessa Asian delivers a blazing, chaotic, unforgettable turn as Sky. From her first line, she injects the film with volatility, jokes that are a little too loud, confrontations that land a little too hard. But this isn't a caricature of the wild one. Asian builds Sky with depth and contradictions. When Sky starts to game the loop, ASEAN shifts from fiery survivor to chess player, eyes darting, calculating, testing the killer. Her moments of strength never feel manufactured. She owns the screen when she takes command. But her vulnerability is what truly sells the performance. There's a sequence where she watches herself die on security footage, again and again, and ASEAN plays it with a brittle edge, almost whispering her lines like they might break her if spoken too loud. She turns Sky into a live wire, brilliant, flawed, and always ready to burn.
Maya Miche as Jules, quiet devestaschen. Maya Miche delivers a performance built on small, quiet devastations.
As Jules, she starts nearly invisible, soft-spoken, uncertain, easily overshadowed. But Mitchell's genius lies in holding back. She builds Jules like a pressure cooker, and when the emotional explosion finally comes, it hurts. In one loop, she has a full-blown panic attack while trying to bandage a friend's wound. It's not dramatic. It's messy, real, and suffocating. Mitchell doesn't glamorize Jules' trauma. She lets it sit uncomfortably. But as Jules finds her footing, Mitchell shows a gradual emboldening. Her voice firms, her eyes harden. She becomes the film's unexpected spine, quietly pushing against the chaos. By the end, Jules is no longer just the empathetic soul. She's the moral core that never gave up, and Mitchell's calm conviction makes that transition feel earned and profound.
Belmont Cameli as Noah, the collapse of the comic.
Belmont Cameli's Noah is the film's Trojan horse. He starts off as the goof, the guy with the ironic comment or awkward timing. But Cameli ensures that you never write him off. Beneath every joke is a tension, a twitch in the smile, a flash in the eye. Once Noah accepts the loop as real, Cameli takes him through a quiet breakdown that feels all the more harrowing because of its subtlety. His face tightens, his pacing changes, and his humor turns into something defensive and bitter. There's a loop where Noah delivers a monologue about watching his own death 6 times in a row. Cameli delivers it like a man trying not to cry while talking about the weather. It's heartbreak wrapped in sarcasm. And when Noah eventually cracks, when the laughs run out, Cameli doesn't beg for pity. He just lets Noah go silent, and that silence speaks volumes.
Hyung-jo as Lina, control de inteligencia with quiet impact.
Ji-young you doesn't have the loudest arc, but hers is one of the most intriguing. As Lina, she's often watching, thinking, staying quiet while others panic or plot. You plays her like a scientist studying an unstable experiment, always composed, but never detached. What makes Yu's performance stand out is the control. Lina feels like someone who's already processed the trauma and is now just working the system. But every so often, something cracks through, a sharp breath, a flicker of fear, and Yu lets you see the cost of keeping it together. Her scenes with Clover are some of the film's most cerebral, full of philosophical weight, delivered with a calm that unnerves. Lina is the mind of the movie, and Yu plays her like a scalpel, precise, clean, and capable of cutting deep.
Peter Stormare de Loeb Spectre.
Peter Stormare is used sparingly, but purposefully. His presence, whether as a cryptic groundskeeper, a vision from the past, or something more supernatural, is drenched in dread. He speaks in riddles, walks like he's slightly out of sync with time, and delivers lines with that signature Stormare drawl, half menace, half prophecy. He's the film's reminder that not everything is explainable, that some horror is just there, watching, and he plays it with such quiet menace that even in scenes where he does nothing but stand there, you feel a chill crawl across your skin. Together, this ensemble becomes more than a cast. They become participants in a ritual of emotional unraveling. Their chemistry, fractured and volatile, mirrors the story's looping structure. Every performance builds on the last, looping trauma and transformation until even the audience feels trapped in their cycle. They don't just sell the horror. They become it. David F. Sandberg doesn't just direct until dawn. He orchestrates it like a symphony of unease, dread, and psychological fragmentation. This is a filmmaker who understands that true horror isn't about jump scares or blood sprays. It's about what lingers, in a shadow, in a silence, in a character's breath right before the scream. Sandberg crafts a film where tone, mood, and narrative structure are not separate elements but strands in a single, tightly coiled rope. And he pulls it tighter with every loop. A mood that suffocates, then morphs. From the first shot, a sweeping, near-silent descent into a fog-soaked valley, the tone is unmistakable: isolation. Sandberg doesn't rush to horror. He suspends the audience in dread. The silence is stretched like skin across bone. Every distant howl, every wind-rattled window builds a mood that feels watched.
Not haunted in the supernatural sense, haunted by something deeper, more insidious: memory, guilt, inevitability.
But the brilliance lies in how that mood mutates with each loop. The first cycle plays like a classical slasher, tense, adrenaline-driven, framed with tight, frantic camera movements. But the second, it leans into surrealism. Scenes extend unnaturally, lights flicker in rhythm with heartbeats, and time stutters visually before restarting. The mood shifts from panic to psychological horror, a fear not of death, but of repetition. And Sandberg understands emotional exhaustion as a tonal device. By the fourth or fifth loop, the mood is not loud, it's quietly despairing. Long, static shots of characters simply waiting for the killer to arrive, resigned to the slaughter. The tone doesn't just scare, it wears you down, loop by loop, until you feel just as hopeless as the people you're watching. Stylistic choices that cut deep. Shot composition is one of Sandberg's strongest tools. He often frames characters against cavernous, dimly lit backdrops, making them appear swallowed by their environment. When fear peaks, the camera often pulls away instead of rushing in, creating a sense of cosmic indifference, as if the universe is watching them unravel and doing nothing to help. And when characters die, Sandberg doesn't glorify the moment. He distills it.
A single bloodstein. A hand twitching.
A breath that never finishes. The actual violence often happens off-screen or in soft focus, heightening the emotional aftermath over the physical act. It's not the death that matters, it's what comes after. The memory, the guilt, the knowing they'll see it again. There are loops where Sandberg plays with aspect ratio and color temperature, subtly signaling the tone. One loop, bathed in a sickly yellow hue, feels like a fever dream. Another, in stark black and white, evokes the voyeurism of found footage and surveillance horror. These aren't gimmicks. They're psychological cues, letting the viewer know, this loop is different. This time, something's off. Pacing that mirrors psychological decline. Sandberg's control of pacing is meticulous. The early stages are brisk, event-heavy, almost structured like levels in a video game. You meet the characters, the killer appears, chaos erupts. Then, cut to black.
The loop resets.
But as the characters start breaking down, so does the pacing. Sandberg begins slowing time. Scenes stretch out, conversations meander, pauses between lines grow longer. One scene, a character sitting silently, contemplating suicide before the loop resets, lasts nearly 2 minutes with no music and almost no dialogue. It's agonizingly slow, and that's the point. The film mimics the character's mental collapse by making the viewer sit in that emotional rot. Then, just when you're dulled into emotional numbness, Sandberg will snap the pacing back, hard.
A jump scare. A sudden betrayal.
A reveal that shatters what you thought you knew. The contrast in tempo becomes a weapon, making moments of horror feel sharper because they arrive like a jolt after a long, dead silence.
Sandberg's vision. Horror as an existential spiral.
Sandberg's storytelling isn't just about scaring, it's about trapping. His use of the time loop isn't flashy or twist-reliant, it's existential. The characters don't just relive events, they relive their worst fears, over and over, each time with slightly more self-awareness and slightly less hope. This looping structure becomes a narrative spiral, not a circle. Characters change, break, betray, sacrifice, despair. The killer doesn't have to evolve. They do. And the more they change, the less certain they are that anything they do matters. In that sense, Until Dawn becomes Sandberg's most philosophical work yet. a meditation on the futility of control, the terror of memory, and the fragility of the human psyche when time itself turns against you. He doesn't need a plot twist to stun the audience. He uses repetition itself as the horror, knowing full well that the most disturbing thing in the universe is not death. It's knowing it's coming again and again, and being unable to stop it. This is David F. Sandberg at his most daring, not because he redefines horror tropes, but because he compresses them into a looping crucible. And then, quietly, methodically, he lets them burn. In Until Dawn, 2025, the editing is not just a technical process, it's an emotional and narrative force. The film's flow is a carefully crafted rhythm that mirrors the unraveling of its characters, manipulating time and space to place the audience in a constant state of uncertainty. Sandberg and editor Michael J. Duthie exploit the mechanics of the time loop to their advantage, using seamless transitions that collapse and stretch time itself. The constant shift, editing as time's prison. The film opens with a rapid pace, throwing the audience into the fray without delay. The first few loops mirror the frantic energy of characters who are still figuring things out. The cut from one event to the next is quick, abrupt. You barely have time to register the terror of one scene before it collapses into the next. The edits are often jarring, doors slamming, shadows moving, bodies falling, and these cuts work like a tight drumbeat, ratcheting up the tension. The quick transitions between moments mirror the initial confusion of the characters, keeping the audience equally disoriented. You're constantly in motion, but never quite sure where you are. As the loops evolve, so does the editing. Sandberg allows time to breathe, allowing the audience to sit with the psychological weight of repetition. The transitions grow slower, drawn out, creating moments where the audience feels the drag of inevitability. In these moments, a simple glance or a breath between characters takes on monumental significance. Extended silences, long unbroken shots, and lingering moments without dialogue begin to dominate. The rhythm of time itself becomes sluggish, almost as if the editing is trying to stretch the very concept of the loop, mirroring the character's internal collapse. Smooth transitions into horror. One of the standout features of the editing is how it handles the shift from normalcy to horror. There's an art to the way the film transitions from a calm scene into one of terror. Subtle cuts, a slight shift in lighting, a soft change in color temperature, the flicker of a light, provide a kind of visual breadcrumb trail that leads you into the next horrifying event. But these shifts aren't abrupt. They feel organic, like a sinking feeling in your stomach as you realize something's wrong. The seamless transitions between loops are particularly impressive. Each time the characters wake up to face the same night, the edit doesn't slap you in the face with obviousness. Instead, the film's transitions are almost imperceptible, a slight fade, a quick cut from one moment to the next. It's like slipping into a half-remembered dream. You don't quite notice when you enter the new loop, you just realize you've gone back again, and in that realization is the chilling horror of the repetition itself. The drag and rush, pacing that mirrors trauma. There are moments in the film where the pacing feels deliberately slowed down, emphasizing a numbing despair that creeps in with each subsequent loop. These sections are heavy with stillness. The characters wander, not sure of what to do, in spaces that feel too large and too empty, and the pacing slows to allow the emotional weight to build. This slowness in the editing becomes the emotional heart of the film. It's not about what happens next, but about the realization that nothing matters, and it's happening again. The audience is not just watching the trauma unfold, they are immersed in it. Yet, just when the film seems to settle into this emotional abyss, the editing will snap back, cutting sharply to a high-energy moment of terror, a scream, a death, or an unexpected twist. These faster-paced cuts jolt the viewer back to the present, aligning the rhythm with the characters' increasing panic. The film's rhythm never becomes monotonous. Instead, it fluctuates between long, tense silences and explosive action, mirroring the way the characters mentally cycle between resignation and frantic survival. The emotional and narrative flow. The way the editing shapes the emotional rhythm of the film is crucial. In the beginning, when the characters are still somewhat fresh and trying to understand the situation, the faster edits maintain a sense of urgency. The audience is pulled forward with them, caught in the chaos. But as they grow more aware of the looping nature of their predicament, the emotional weight becomes too heavy to carry at a breakneck pace. The cuts become longer. There's a palpable sense of time slowing, and the character's emotional exhaustion seeps through the screen. It's almost as if the viewer is being dragged into the same psychological spiral. At times, the pacing drags intentionally, and it's not a flaw. These moments of stillness are like a breath between screams, giving the audience a moment to process the terror. These slower scenes echo the tension of waiting for the loop to reset, for the killer to strike, for a way out that never comes. The film makes the audience feel the time passing, the way dread elongates the simplest moments. When the action picks up, it's often during the horror-filled climaxes. The editing shifts again to a more jarring, rapid-fire rhythm. Every action, every chase, every discovery feels like it's happening too fast, because, emotionally, the characters are in a constant state of survival. The faster cuts reflect their adrenaline, but also their panic. They can't escape the loop, and they can't escape the madness. The emotional impact of the film's flow. The editing of Until Dawn is inseparable from its themes. The fractured pace is a mirror of the characters' fractured mental states. Each transition, slow or fast, pushes you deeper into the experience of being trapped in a cycle. You never quite know what's coming, but you know that you'll be caught in it again. The rhythmic shifts from terror to calm don't just make the horror more intense, they mirror the characters' emotional pendulum. The way they go from hope to despair, from terror to numbness, is reflected in the cutting style. And this ebb and flow immerses the audience in the experience of the time loop. By manipulating the flow of time through editing, the film forces the viewer to live through the repetition alongside the characters. The slow passages create a suffocating atmosphere, but the faster moments pull you into a chaotic, exhilarating sprint. In a film built on repetition, the pacing itself becomes an extension of the psychological and emotional claustrophobia, and it's this interplay between speed and stillness that truly elevates the horror. In Until Dawn, the editing isn't just a tool to push the plot forward. It's a weapon that controls your emotional state, dictating when you should feel lost, when you should feel panicked, and when you should just feel exhausted. And in that exhaustion, the horror really starts to hit. In Until Dawn, 2025, director David F. Sandberg takes a bold leap away from the familiar mechanics of the original game and instead constructs a horror narrative that's simultaneously intimate, psychological, and cosmic in its terror. The story, while rooted in the tried-and-true slasher structure, mutates rapidly into something far more unpredictable and deeply unsettling, thanks to its looping mechanism and genre-blending ambition. The opening, grief as catalyst. The film opens not with immediate horror, but with quiet, unresolved trauma. Clover, Ella Rubin, is a haunted figure, haunted not by literal ghosts, yet, but by the loss of her older sister Melanie, Maya Mitchell, who vanished without a trace 1 year earlier. This emotional wound sets the tone. There's a pervasive sense of guilt, confusion, and emotional stasis. Clover's decision to return to the site of her sister's disappearance, accompanied by a group of close-knit but emotionally strained friends, is as much about closure as it is about reckoning with the unknown.
This is not a Kerfrutingetewa.
The setting is bleak, gray skies, overgrown paths, remnants of a forgotten visitor center in the middle of a vast and eerily silent wilderness. The isolation feels complete, almost mythic in its scope. The descent. Slasher mode activated. Initially, the narrative walks familiar ground. The group splits up, tensions rise, secrets are hinted at. Sandberg plays with the audience's expectations, leaning into classic horror tropes, only to subvert them almost immediately. When the masked killer first strikes, the film doesn't build suspense, it shocks. The deaths are fast, brutal, and merciless. There's no time to grieve or regroup. The killer isn't interested in taunting them or playing games. He's a force, silent, faceless, methodical. But then, everything rewinds.
The same night begins again.
The same arrival at the valley. The same entry into the visitor center.
Only Clover remembers dying.
At first, she doubts her sanity. Then the others begin to remember as well. Panic sets in, but escape is impossible. Every time they die, they start over. But it's not a clean loop. The setting changes subtly.
The killer adapts.
The valley itself begins to seem sentient.
The experiment. Layers of horror.
This is where Until Dawn becomes a genre-bending experiment. Each loop plunges the characters into a different form of horror. In one loop, the killer is not human at all, an ancient creature with eyes like burning coals, stalking them from the treetops. In another, the events play out found footage style, as if they're trapped inside one of their own documentary recordings. In yet another, the group encounters versions of themselves, grotesque, wrong, like wax figures come to life. These aren't just stylistic shifts. Each variation tears at the characters' psyches. They begin to doubt not only what's real, but who they are.
Old resentments emerge.
Fault lines in their friendships crack wide open. Some become fatalistic. Others grow increasingly paranoid. The time loop, it becomes clear, is not just a punishment. It's a crucible. The valley is testing them, or perhaps it feeds on them. And it always resets before they can truly escape.
Emotional unraveling, the art of the horror.
Clover, as the emotional anchor of the story, undergoes the most profound transformation. Each loop brings her closer to the truth, not just about what happened to Melanie, but about herself. Flashbacks hint at a fractured relationship between the sisters. Was Clover to blame for Melanie's disappearance? Did she miss a warning sign? Was there a moment she could have changed everything? The time loop forces her to relive her guilt in increasingly violent metaphors. Melanie appears in visions, sometimes as a ghost, sometimes as an accusatory doppelganger, sometimes as the killer herself. Whether these are hallucinations, supernatural interventions, or symbolic projections is never made clear. But the impact is undeniable. Clover is being dismantled emotionally, loop by loop.
Myth and madness, world beyond the loop.
As the narrative deepens, a mythology begins to surface. Scraps of old maps, cryptic journal entries left behind in the visitor center, disturbing carvings in the walls, all pointing to an ancient entity or curse tied to the land. One journal suggests the valley has claimed others before. That the time loop is not unique. It's ritual.
Sacrifice.
A cycle that feeds off pain and fear.
And the masked killer?
He is less a character than a function, an agent of the loop, maybe even a former victim himself, now twisted into servitude. Peter Stormare's appearance as Dr. Hill, reprising his iconic role from the original game, adds a surreal layer. He appears in dreamlike sequences, interrogating Clover in an undefined space, asking questions about morality, choice, guilt, and fear. These interludes blur the line between memory and manipulation. Is Dr. Hill real? Is Clover creating him as a coping mechanism? Or is he part of something larger, a custodian of the loop's moral logic?
The breaking point. Choice and consequence.
Eventually, the group fragments. Some try to make peace with their fate. Others seek to manipulate the loop. One character attempts suicide, hoping it will break the cycle. Another murders a friend in cold blood, convinced it's the only way to change the outcome. These desperate acts escalate the emotional stakes, grounding the supernatural horror in very human tragedy. Clover, now a shell of her former self, uncovers a final clue, one last message from Melanie, hidden beneath the floorboards of the visitor center. It's a confession, a map, and a farewell all in one. Clover realizes that to break the loop, she must face a choice she refused to make a year ago. A choice that cost her sister everything.
Final moments. A haunting ambiguity.
The climax is less about resolution and more about confrontation.
Clover descends into the heart of the valley, alone.
The killer is there, but so is Melanie, alive or dead, it's unclear. There's a ritual. There's a moment of stillness. The next morning, the sun rises for the first time in the entire film. But whether Clover escaped, or simply entered a new kind of loop, is left ambiguous.
The scream fades to black with one last chilling detail, the fan techo of a scream, Looping endlessly beneath the end credits.
In Until Dawn, 2025, time itself is the enemy, and memory is a maze. Through its looping structure, shifting genre aesthetics, and emotional fragmentation, the film pulls the viewer into an experience that's as disorienting as it is terrifying. Each reset isn't just a do-over, it's a descent.
A peeling back of the soul. A scream that never ends.
Narrative structure and themes. Deep dive into the heart of the horror. In Until Dawn, 2025, the narrative structure isn't just a storytelling technique, it's a relentless psychological assault, a kaleidoscopic descent into the many faces of fear. By embracing a non-linear looping timeline, the film abandons the safety of predictability and plunges its characters, and its audience, into a spiraling vortex of chaos. The horror doesn't come from one source, one killer, or one entity, but from the nature of time itself, fractured and malevolent, refusing to move forward or offer escape. This looping mechanic doesn't reset events cleanly. Instead, each cycle distorts reality, with the rules of time and space degrading further with every iteration. What begins as a straightforward slasher narrative transforms into a fragmented, multi-genre exploration of terror. The loops function almost like separate acts in an anthology, except with the same characters carried from one genre nightmare into another. They bleed, they die, and then they awaken again, wounded in new ways, not always physically, but mentally, emotionally, existentially. The time loop as narrative engine. The time loop is more than a plot twist, it's the engine that drives the film's psychological momentum. Each return to the beginning is slightly skewed, like waking from one nightmare only to fall into a worse one. The characters experience déjà vu, psychic echoes, or even partial memories of previous loops. As these experiences accumulate, they begin to fracture under the weight of repetition, mirroring the audience's growing unease. Unlike typical time loop films that focus on solving a mystery, Groundhog Day, Edge of Tomorrow, Happy Death Day, Until Dawn uses the loop as a horror crucible. It's not about discovery, it's about survival and the erosion of hope. The further they go, the less real everything feels. Environments shift slightly. Dialogue changes. Characters behave subtly differently. And at the center of it all is the growing sense that they are not in control, that time itself is performing horror. Genre shifting within loops. The most radical use of the time loop mechanic is how it cycles through horror subgenres, using each to test the character's psyches and break the viewer's genre expectations.
Slasche horror. First loop.
The most straightforward iteration.
A masked killer hunts a group through darkened corridors and mist-covered woods.
The violence is brutal and fast, the tone grounded in the panic of being hunted.
Supernatural horror. Second loop.
The visitor center is haunted. Objects move on their own.
Doors slams shut.
The group encounters a ghostly woman who may be Melanie, or something wearing her face. The killer becomes more specter than man, slipping through walls and appearing in reflections.
Time feels slower. Dread seeker. A body horror. Third loop.
Physical decay sets in. One character finds their limbs rotting despite the reset. Another tears off a mask only to find their own screaming face underneath. The killer performs grotesque surgeries on victims. The loop becomes flesh, malleable, infected. Found footage horror. Fourth loop. The film itself fractures. Viewers watch through static-heavy camcorders, night vision, drone footage. Characters start seeing themselves through the lens. Dead already, dying again. The perspective becomes unreliable, voyeuristic, even implicating the audience in the horror. A cosmic/existential horror. Later loops. Reality breaks down entirely. Characters speak in reverse. They see other versions of themselves, screaming warnings.
The stars shift.
Time no longer loops predictably. They realize something ancient and unnameable is watching. They begin to ask, are we looping because we failed? Or because something doesn't want us to leave? Each genre shift does more than provide stylistic flair. It reflects the progressive psychological breakdown of the group and deepens the film's central themes: fear of the unknown, guilt, trauma, and the search for meaning in a senseless, recursive world.
Sims, guilt, memory, and repetition.
1. The weight of guilt. Clover's personal journey, anchored in the mystery of her sister's disappearance, becomes the emotional core of the film. The loops function as a metaphor for unresolved guilt. No matter how many times she tries to save her friends, uncover the truth, or survive the night, she's forced to start again, because something inside her refuses to let go. Her trauma loops with her. 2. The fluidity of memory. Each loop brings inconsistencies, items out of place, altered conversations, missing people. Memory becomes suspect. The characters can't rely on what they remember or even trust that their memories are their own. They begin to question whether they are experiencing the loops as a group or are merely projections in someone else's recurring nightmare.
3. Repetition as horror.
The very idea of repetition, usually comforting in routine, becomes nightmarish. Death, pain, and terror repeat, but meaning does not. This echoes existential horror, as characters realize that no matter what they change, the outcome is the same. Some even begin to suspect they deserve it. Meta-horror and commentary on the genre. Sandberg also uses the time loop as a meta-horror commentary. Each loop satirizes or critiques tropes within that subgenre. The slasher loop features characters splitting up despite knowing better. The found footage loop mocks how the camera is never dropped, even during panic. The supernatural loop comments on ghosts being treated like puzzles to solve rather than traumas to understand. The shifting styles force the viewer to confront their own comfort zones within horror. What frightens one person may not scare another. By cycling through the horror spectrum, Until Dawn weaponizes genre familiarity and then rips it away just when the viewer starts to feel safe in the rules.
Conclusion of the structure, without ending the story.
The narrative design of Until Dawn, 2025, is not a clean arc. It's a spiral, dragging deeper into horror with each rotation. What begins as a genre-savvy teen mystery evolves into a labyrinth of dread that leaves the characters begging for a reality that sticks, a death that stays dead, a truth that holds shape. There is no comfort, no final girl trope to lean on, no easy answer. The structure is the horror. The loop is the villain. And the only rule is, it all begins again, until dawn. Character dynamics and emotional impact, the crumbling psyches and evolving relationships in Until Dawn, 2025. In Until Dawn, 2025, character development is not a luxury, it's a crucible. Every cycle through the loop strips away another layer of pretense, defense, and bravado, exposing raw psychological flesh beneath. As the group confronts not only a masked killer but also the relentless grind of time itself, their personalities don't just evolve, they shatter, reassemble, and mutate. The time loop doesn't allow for emotional stasis. It forces growth, regression, and revelation in equal measure, as each new iteration reconfigures their dynamic like pieces in a living puzzle. This is not a film where archetypes survive. The jock doesn't stay the jock.
The comic relief stops being funny.
The final girl is never final. With every reset, the audience watches these characters disintegrate and reform, caught in an emotional centrifuge designed to test the limits of fear, guilt, loyalty, and identity.
Clover, the anchor of sorrow and obsession.
Ella Rubin's Clover is the emotional axis around which the entire narrative revolves. Her sister's disappearance isn't just the inciting incident, it's a wound that the loop rips open repeatedly. What begins as guilt over not preventing Melanie's vanishing spirals into something darker, the suspicion that she might somehow be responsible. As the loops accumulate, Clover becomes a character haunted by multiple ghosts, her sister, the killer, and her own reflection. Each loop brings a new version of Clover, more driven, more broken, more detached. She moves from wide-eyed horror to cold calculation, trying to manipulate the loop's conditions like a scientist dissecting a living thing. But it's never enough. Her growing detachment fractures her relationships, especially with those trying to emotionally support her. Yet at her core is the human ache to save Melanie, to make the past right. This need becomes so obsessive that other lives, including her friends, start to become means to an end. And that's when the film asks, can love, even in its most desperate form, become monstrous? Michael Cimino's character, the idealist turned nihilist. Initially portrayed as a stabilizing figure, empathetic, rational, always trying to hold the group together, Michael Cimino's character, presumed to be Clover's closest friend or perhaps love interest, undergoes the most dramatic psychological collapse. In early loops, he insists there must be rules, patterns, logic to their suffering. He's the one who sketches maps, times the loops, records variables. But the horror of repetition grinds him down. When his solutions fail, when the people he saves die anyway, when reality bends in defiance of reason, his optimism implodes. By the midway point of the film, he becomes a cold fatalist, resigned to the loop and unafraid of death. In one particularly harrowing loop, he sacrifices himself without hesitation, not for the greater good, but because he no longer believes there is one. His transformation isn't melodramatic, it's quietly devastating. Watching someone go from hope to nihilism is a horror in itself, especially when you remember who he was at the beginning.
Odessa Asion's character Chaos Incarnate.
Odessa Asian delivers a performance that tracks emotional chaos like a live wire. She begins as the brash, sarcastic member of the group, quick with a joke, always deflecting seriousness. But as the loops mount, her facade breaks. Unlike the others, she doesn't seek control. She embraces the madness. There's a loop where she deliberately provokes the killer, laughing even as she's attacked. Another where she isolates herself, convinced that the group is cursed and she's better off alone. Her erratic behavior introduces a volatile energy that unsettles both the characters and the audience. She embodies how trauma doesn't just erode, it can mutate, making someone unpredictable and dangerous, even to themselves. Yet within this chaos, moments of heartbreaking vulnerability surface, quiet monologues to her camera in the found footage loop, or whispered pleas to a god she doesn't believe in. She's the emotional grenade waiting to detonate, and when she does, it's both spectacular and tragic.
Hyung-jo and Belmont Cameli, The Fracturing Friendship.
These two characters provide the emotional subplot of companionship under siege. They begin as the inseparable duo, perhaps dating, or perhaps best friends with unspoken tension, but the loop drives a wedge between them. They start blaming each other for deaths, withholding information, testing one another's loyalty. What's devastating is the incremental nature of this breakdown. A misstep in one loop isn't forgotten in the next.
Epalegis lose meaning.
By the final third of the film, they no longer trust each other. One of them even abandons the other in a loop, out of fear, not cruelty, and the guilt from that betrayal ripples forward, poisoning every interaction thereafter. Their storyline becomes an intimate portrait of how even the strongest bonds can collapse under constant existential threat. The time loop doesn't just kill characters, it strips relationships bare.
Peter Stormare de Watch in the Dark.
Peter Stormare's character, an enigmatic presence who appears in different forms across multiple loops, a janitor, a ranger, a preacher, a grieving father, is the film's psychological and thematic cipher. His identity is never fully clear, but he always offers cryptic guidance, like a dream figure from a Jungian subconscious. He never participates in the action directly, but his words haunt the characters. You keep looking for the end. But what if the end is looking back at you? He seems to remember events across loops. He warns Clover not to dig too deep. At times, he offers a map, a key, a story. But his ultimate allegiance is unclear. Some loops hint that he may be a construct of the loop itself, a personification of entropy, or guilt, or judgment. Emotionally, Stormare's presence injects a sense of inevitability and philosophical weight into the horror. He reminds the audience that fear isn't just about death, it's about meaninglessness. Emotional crescendo, loop fatigue, and the cracks of humanity. By the final act, the group is reduced, physically and emotionally. Survivors no longer scream at death. They mourn with a terrifying numbness. They anticipate the killer like a recurring illness. One character carves tally marks into their skin, not to track loops, but to remember they're still alive. But what Until Dawn captures with aching precision is this: No one loop is the same emotionally. Even if the killer strikes at the same time or the same place, it hits differently when it's your second, your fifth, your 25th time dying, or watching someone else die. The horror is cumulative. And in that cumulative horror, the film finds its most haunting emotional truth. We break differently. Some with tears, others with silence. Some with cruelty. Some with sacrifice. Some with love that turns to obsession. Some with hate that turns inward. Until Dawn uses its supernatural mechanics to explore one profoundly human idea. What do we become when we have to face our worst night again and again and again?
Cinematic Techniques, The Anatomy of Fear in Until Dawn 2025.
David F. Sandberg, known for his mastery in evoking dread from shadows and silence, elevates Until Dawn beyond the conventions of horror cinema through a meticulously orchestrated fusion of direction, cinematography, and sound design. This isn't a film that merely shows horror. It immerses the viewer in it, making the audience feel as though they, too, are caught in the loop, slowly unraveling with each passing hour. Let's break down how the team behind the camera, especially Sandberg, cinematographer Maxime Alexander, and composer Benjamin Wallfisch, constructs a multi-sensory environment where time is elastic, reality is unstable, and fear is ever-evolving.
Direction Sandberg's Labyrinths of Dread.
David F. Sandberg directs Until Dawn not as a straightforward slasher, but as a circular descent into psychological madness. His background in atmospheric horror, Lights Out, Annabelle creation, is fully realized here through an obsessive attention to pacing, perspective, and spatial unease. He turns each loop into a slightly distorted mirror of the last, subtly altering character positioning, shot durations, or blocking in ways that quietly unsettle the viewer. Sandberg eschews jump scares for a slow-boil horror rhythm that builds across loops, not just within them. For instance, the first loop might introduce the killer as a fleeting silhouette in the background, but by the third, that same shot lingers longer, the figure moves differently, or the sound design tightens the frame's tension. These changes amplify the sense of unpredictability. Viewers never know what's going to change, even when the characters think they do. He also toys with point of view in fascinating ways. Some loops are shot primarily from Clover's perspective, deepening her descent into obsession. Others shift unexpectedly to supporting characters, offering fragmented, unreliable versions of the night. There's even a found-footage-style loop where the characters document their own deaths, creating a meta-horror experience that blurs the line between observer and participant.
Cinematography Maxime Alexandre's Visual Repetition Indica.
Maxime Alexander's lensing is a masterclass in visual storytelling that evolves with the psychological arc of the characters. The early loops are captured with a restrained steadiness, composed frames, careful symmetry, clear depth. But as the trauma accumulates, the camera becomes increasingly erratic. Handheld sequences, Dutch angles, shallow focus, and rapid shifts in light and shadow.
It's a visual manifestation of unraveling sanity.
Color plays a crucial role. The visitor center and surrounding woods are rendered in a muted, almost desaturated palette at the beginning. Steel blues, mossy greens, washed-out browns. But in later loops, this changes. One loop is cast in an oppressive crimson tint, evoking blood and rage. Another takes on a pale, ghostly grayscale, with blown-out highlights that distort facial features and turn the world into a waking nightmare. Lighting is used not only for mood, but for narrative signaling. The killer often emerges from zones of pure blackness, a darkness that feels sentient. In one particularly memorable loop, Clover enters a room where light fixtures begin flickering in a pattern that seems intentional, like a heartbeat or Morse code, as if the environment itself is trying to communicate or warn. Alexander also manipulates spatial memory. Locations repeat, but small changes. An open door that was closed, a photo turned face down, a bloodstain that wasn't there before, are captured with a clinical precision. The camera encourages the viewer to play detective, while simultaneously fostering a deep paranoia. What have we missed? Sound and score. Benjamin Wallfisch's auditory uncanny. If the visuals build the architecture of fear, Benjamin Wallfisch's score fills it with breath. His music doesn't simply underscore events, it distorts them. The main theme, introduced as a fragile piano motif during Clover's memories of Melanie, is twisted through each loop, slowed down, reversed, layered with disharmonic strings, or submerged under grinding bass drones. Sound design is used not just to frighten, but to deceive. In some loops, footsteps echo in the wrong direction. Whispers emerge from beneath floorboards or through dead radios. At one point, the killer's blade doesn't make a slicing sound. It hums, like an electrical current, introducing a supernatural uncertainty. Wallfish employs tension drones and pulsing tones that grow louder and more complex the closer a character gets to a moment of realization or death. It's not a musical cue, but an emotional one, panic rendered in frequency. Perhaps most chilling are the silent loops, where all ambient sound drops out entirely.
No wind, no birds, no footfalls, just breath and heartbeat.
These sequences create an unnatural stillness that leaves the audience hyper-aware of every motion and sound until the inevitable disruption strikes like a scream in a cathedral. Editing and temporal manipulation. The editing, tight, sharp, and purposefully disorienting, supports the theme of destabilized reality. Cuts between loops are never the same. Some are sudden and jarring, others slow and dreamlike. Sometimes the loop restarts mid-sentence, or in the middle of a death scene, giving the impression that even time is malfunctioning. Key sequences are cross-cut across loops, showing different outcomes to the same decisions. A hallway scene might replay 3 times in a row, each time ending with a different character's demise. The repetition isn't just stylistic, it's psychological. It drills into the audience's brain like a mantra of futility.
In one brilliantly edited sequence, the characters try to map the night's events on a wall using string and thumbtacks. As they work, the loop resets, but the map remains. And each time they return to that room, the map has changed slightly, edited by unseen hands. The audience starts looking at it obsessively, tracking the smallest detail, just as the characters do. It's a moment where form and function become one. Conclusion: a symphony of controlled chaos. What makes Until Dawn, 2025, truly haunting is that its horror isn't only in what you see, it's in what you suspect, what you can't remember clearly, what might have changed without you noticing. Sandberg, Alexander, and Wallfish don't just craft scares. They craft dread, the slow poison of uncertainty that accumulates with every loop, every shadow, every echo. The result is a cinematic experience that traps you inside its machinery. You begin to anticipate patterns, question your memory, dread the next scene, not because of what might happen, but because of what did happen, what should happen, and what no longer makes sense. In the film's world, death is only part of the fear. The real terror is not being able to trust the world's rules anymore, because the world is watching you fall apart, and it keeps pressing rewind. In Until Dawn, 2025, the score, composed by Benjamin Wallfish, plays an integral role in shaping the film's tone and atmosphere. From the very first notes, the music doesn't simply accompany the action. It defines it, weaving a symbiotic relationship with the unfolding horror. Wallfish uses the score not just to punctuate moments of fear, but to manipulate the emotional landscape of the film, making the audience feel trapped in the same cyclical torment as the characters. The music is both a guiding hand and a shadow, subtly nudging the story in unexpected directions. Subtle tension and the sound of the loop. At the start, the score introduces a deep undercurrent of dread with a low, almost imperceptible hum that mimics the unsettling feeling of something being wrong without revealing what that is. Wallfish doesn't rely on overt musical stings to signal terror. Rather, he uses minimalist arrangements that build tension gradually. This sparse approach mirrors the slow unfolding of the character's realization that something otherworldly is at play. The use of repetition in the music, echoing the time loop itself, is a key component of the score's design. The same motifs return in varying forms throughout the film, recontextualized each time the characters wake up and relive the night. These recurring themes don't just mark the passage of time. They create a haunting familiarity, pulling the audience deeper into the cyclical nature of the terror. The score doesn't allow you to escape the loop. Each time it returns, it makes the audience feel like they are experiencing the exact same moment, over and over again. The role of silence, heightening fear. Equally significant as the score is Wallfish's use of silence. At several points, the absence of sound becomes a weapon in itself. These moments of quiet don't just feel like breaks in the music. They feel like moments where time itself stalls, where the suspense becomes unbearable. In scenes where the characters are uncertain of what comes next, or when they enter new rooms, the sudden lack of sound heightens the dread. The silence becomes like an invisible presence, and the audience is forced to wait for the next impending attack, their nerves fraying as every second stretches longer than the last. The quiet also serves to mirror the psychological isolation of the characters, who are trapped in an environment that seems to distort not just time, but their perception of reality. The absence of music in these moments underscores their mental state, forcing the audience to focus on the ambient sounds, the wind howling outside, a door creaking, the faintest rustle of movement. These small sounds are amplified, making the silence almost louder than the music could ever be. Motifs and emotional resonance. Throughout the film, Wallfish crafts several key motifs that enhance the emotional weight of the narrative. One of the most prominent is a low, mournful melody that appears during pivotal emotional moments. This melody is soft, but unmistakable, a melancholic theme associated with loss and helplessness. Each time it appears, it signals a deeper emotional descent for the characters, often during moments of realization about their impending doom. It evokes a sense of futility and grief, underscoring the film's exploration of trauma and survival. The repetition of this theme throughout the loops gradually dissolves any sense of hope. It becomes a reminder of the character's inevitable fate and the relentless nature of the loop itself. The motif isn't just an emotional cue, it's a sonic symbol of their imprisonment, as though the music itself acknowledges that escape is impossible. Dynamic shifts from supernatural to slasher. Wallfish also expertly manipulates the score to reflect the shift in tone from traditional slasher horror to something more supernatural and psychologically disturbing. Early in the film, when the group is still unaware of the killer's presence, the music builds slowly, using low strings and dissonant chords to introduce an element of paranoia. This sonic tension mirrors the characters' growing unease, particularly in scenes where the characters are still attempting to decipher what's happening. As the killer's presence becomes undeniable, the music picks up, with fast-paced rhythms and sharp brass stabs that push the audience into a state of constant alertness. The rhythm becomes erratic, mirroring the chaos of the chase scenes. However, just as the horror seems to peak, the music shifts again. It evolves into something more ethereal and unsettling as the supernatural elements of the story unfold. Strings become higher and more discordant, swirling in the background like a phantom presence, suggesting that the killer may not just be human, but a part of something darker and more ancient. The climax, a crescendo of fear. As the climax of the film builds, when the final loops seem to bring everything to a head, the score swells into a powerful crescendo of sound. Wallfish uses layered compositions to create an overwhelming sense of total chaos, where every instrument plays at full force, reflecting the heightened stakes. This is the moment where the sound seems to break free from any restraint, enveloping the audience in a maelstrom of sound and fury, mirroring the character's desperate fight for survival. But then, in the final moments, just as the film appears to resolve its story, Wallfish pulls back, stripping away the layers of the music to return to a quiet, haunting motif. This final return to the opening theme creates a sense of cyclical inevitability, reinforcing the film's central idea that No matter how hard the characters fight, they are always bound to repeat the same events. The contrast between the intensity of the final sequence and the return to quiet is profoundly unsettling. Balance between music and story. The score in Until Dawn never feels overbearing. Wallfish achieves a delicate balance between subtlety and emotional intensity. The music never forces the audience to feel something. Instead, it guides the emotions, slowly building tension and then pulling back, allowing the characters' actions and the horror itself to become the focus. The rhythm of the music works hand in hand with the pacing and editing to create an atmosphere that is always on the brink of eruption, never allowing the audience to relax. In a genre where music can often become a crutch, pushing the audience towards certain emotions in a heavy-handed way, Wallfish's score is a masterclass in restraint. His work in Until Dawn isn't just about creating moments of fear. It's about drawing you into the psychological collapse of the characters, becoming an invisible presence that amplifies their emotional and physical struggles. Every note, every silence, and every crescendo has its place, never overpowering, but always present in ways that force the audience to feel what the characters feel. In this way, the score doesn't just enhance the atmosphere. It is the atmosphere, guiding you through a world where time repeats, and every moment is both familiar and terrifyingly new. In Until Dawn, 2025, the visual effects are crafted to serve the story and heighten the film's atmosphere, without drawing attention to themselves. The film balances practical effects with digital effects in a way that never feels artificial or out of place. Instead, the visuals work in harmony with the film's tone, contributing to a world that feels tangible and immersive while also hinting at the unsettling and supernatural forces at play. Practical effects, grit, and reality. From the very first frames, the use of practical effects grounds the film in a sense of raw reality. The remote valley, the abandoned visitor center, and the desolate landscapes are all physically constructed in a way that pulls the audience into the environment. There's a palpable sense of texture and space in these sets that digital effects simply cannot replicate. The cracks in the walls, the rust on the metal, and the decaying remnants of the building feel real, and in a horror film, this physical presence is essential. The viewer feels like they are with the characters, trapped in the same claustrophobic, decaying environment. In the kill scenes, the use of practical effects is particularly impressive. When the masked killer strikes, the blood, gore, and injuries are tangible, often shot with close-ups that reveal the grotesque nature of the wounds. This type of effect is intense and visceral, and it maintains the grittiness that the film's horror demands. There's no sense of detachment when blood spills or limbs are broken, because it all feels grounded in real-world physics and materials. The tactile nature of practical effects gives the audience a level of immersion that is both unsettling and believable. Digital effects, heightening the unseen. However, as the film begins to blur the lines between reality and the supernatural, the use of digital effects comes into play, but it does so with restraint and purpose. The shifts in time and the horror manifestations are enhanced by digital elements, but rather than feeling like obvious CGI, they blend into the narrative as natural extensions of the world. For example, when the characters encounter visions or strange phenomena, the digital effects are used to create ghostly distortions or otherworldly creatures that don't feel out of place within the established environment. These moments of digital enhancement are designed to feel like extensions of the already unsettling atmosphere, rather than distractions that pull the viewer out of the story. The time loop itself, a central conceit of the film, also benefits from digital effects. The loops are presented in subtle, glitchy flashes or flickers in the environment that convey a break in reality. These moments are disorienting without overwhelming the viewer with excessive spectacle. The visual distortion often serves as a physical manifestation of the character's psychological collapse, signaling that the world they're navigating is not only dangerous, but also shifting and unstable. Seamless integration, enhancing immersion. The true strength of the visual effects in Until Dawn lies in their ability to support the story without overshadowing it. The film never lapses into the trap of showcasing flashy CGI just for the sake of spectacle. The effects are integrated naturally into the film's overall design, often used to underscore the emotional and psychological tension rather than to simply create a spectacle. For instance, when the characters experience supernatural phenomena or are pursued by the killer, the digital effects work in harmony with the practical effects to create a sense of increasing claustrophobia and paranoia. The use of shadows and light, digital or practical, reinforces this, as the dark corners of the visitor center or the unlit woods outside become places of both physical and psychological terror. When combined with the eerie score, the visual effects serve to tighten the film's grip on the audience, making the viewer feel as though they are truly trapped in this cycle of horror. Practical versus digital, a symbiotic relationship. One of the most effective aspects of Until Dawn is the symbiotic relationship between its practical and digital effects. While practical effects bring a gritty, visceral authenticity to the film's more grounded horror, digital effects are used in key moments to push the boundaries of the story's supernatural elements. For example, when the characters encounter hallucinations or when they begin to experience the psychological breakdown caused by the time loop, digital effects are utilized to create a sense of distortion in reality. The walls may begin to close in, or the shadows may stretch unnaturally. However, the digital effects never overpower the practical elements. Rather, they function as subtle enhancements that allow the film to explore the supernatural and psychological horror without abandoning the grounded realism that the practical effects provide. The combination of both creates a sense of tension between the real and the unreal, with the digital effects serving as a representation of the character's unraveling perceptions. Visual effects and immersion in horror. The use of visual effects in Until Dawn is never about making the film feel like a video game adaptation or indulging in excessive spectacle. Instead, the visual effects serve to enhance the horror experience, making the audience feel not only the physical danger the characters face, but also their psychological torment. The seamless blending of practical and digital effects contributes to an atmosphere that feels immersive and unpredictable, where danger can come from anywhere and the very fabric of reality is constantly in flux. This careful integration of practical and digital effects adds to the mood of the film, ensuring that the horror never feels predictable or superficial. Whether through the distorted, glitching imagery of the time loops or the realistic gore that confronts the characters, the effects work together to create an experience that's both visceral and psychological, keeping the audience on edge at all times. In Until Dawn 2025, the settings, props, and overall production design play a crucial role in building a world that is not only believable, but also unsettling, claustrophobic, and hauntingly immersive. Director David F. Sandberg and his production team meticulously craft every aspect of the environment to enhance the film's psychological terror, where each location feels alive with history, secrets, and unseen threats. The Remote Valley, a place lost in time. The film opens in a remote valley, a setting that immediately sets the tone for isolation. The valley, dense with fog and surrounded by towering, darkened trees, feels detached from the outside world, almost as if it exists in a time bubble. The natural landscape, with its rugged terrain, imposing cliffs, and tangled underbrush, functions as a constant reminder that the characters are far from civilization. There's a haunting stillness that permeates the valley, as if the land itself is holding on to secrets it no longer wishes to share. This disconnection from the modern world emphasizes the vulnerability of the characters. The valley isn't just a backdrop. It's an active part of the story, suffocating the characters and trapping them in their relentless journey for answers. The valley itself is visually compelling, its beauty masked by an overwhelming sense of dread. The way the fog rolls in, or the trees seem to close in on the characters, in some scenes creates a feeling of entrapment and hopelessness. The landscape doesn't just reflect the story's themes of isolation and fear. It amplifies them, making the environment a character in itself. The constant presence of nature, with its foreboding shadows, adds an eerie texture to the narrative, turning even the most ordinary landscapes into places of lurking terror. The abandoned visitor center, a decaying echo of the past. The abandoned visitor center, where much of the story unfolds, is perhaps the film's most significant setting. This dilapidated building acts as both a physical and psychological labyrinth. The decay and neglect are evident in every corner, from the peeling wallpaper to the rusted equipment left behind, all of which hints at the center's forgotten history. This crumbling space becomes a metaphor for the characters' own psychological unraveling, as they face the horrors of their pasts while trapped in the time loop. Visually, the building is a nightmarish reflection of a once functional space turned into a place of death and despair. The broken windows, cracked mirrors, and abandoned furniture create a sense of disrepair and desolation, as though the building itself is slowly decaying, mirroring the character's sense of dread and hopelessness. The flickering lights, the broken-down hallways, and the ominous silence in each room only add to the building's haunting atmosphere. Props and objects, silent witnesses to the horror. The props used throughout the film are meticulously chosen to deepen the sense of mystery and fear. Objects such as photographs, personal belongings, and scrapbooks act as small pieces of the puzzle, hinting at the past traumas and hidden secrets that fuel the narrative. These props are not mere background elements. They serve as vital tools for the character's investigation, and in many cases, they provide crucial insight into the mystery of the sisters' disappearance. Perhaps one of the most impactful uses of props is the mask worn by the killer. The mask is not just an object of terror. It's a visual symbol of anonymity, making the killer seem more of a force of nature than a person. This object is not just a tool for physical harm, but a representation of the horror the characters face, one that's faceless and unpredictable. The killer's mask remains a constant presence in the story, reinforcing the idea that the horror in the film is imminent, relentless, and unavoidable. The blurring of reality and the supernatural. As the film progresses, the locations shift and distort, reflecting the psychological breakdown of the characters and the supernatural forces at play. The time loop itself is represented in the physical spaces. Hallways seem to stretch endlessly, doors close when they shouldn't, and rooms appear where none were before. These subtle distortions are not immediately obvious, but become more pronounced as the film goes on, emphasizing the uncertainty and fragmentation of time. The environment no longer feels like a place bound by logic or reason. Instead, it seems to operate according to its own rules, just as the characters' perceptions of reality begin to break down. One particularly chilling detail is how rooms within the visitor center are presented in multiple states, depending on the loop the characters are experiencing. In one loop, the walls might seem perfectly intact, while in another, the building appears more dilapidated or damaged. This constant shifting in the physicality of the environment reflects the characters' growing sense of instability and their loss of control. The production design thus becomes a visual representation of the psychological torment the characters are enduring. Visually disturbing elements, shadows and light. The use of shadows and light within the film settings is another key aspect that enhances the psychological horror. The play between light and darkness adds a layer of tension, where the characters can never fully escape the watchful eye of the killer, and the world around them seems to move and shift in the dark. The low lighting and shadowy corners are not just there for visual aesthetics. They create a space where the unknown lurks just out of view. The world feels inherently unsafe. Even the smallest darkened corner could conceal a threat, whether it's the masked killer or the supernatural forces that blur the edges of reality. The limited color palette, dominated by cool blues, grays, and muted earth tones, further emphasizes the bleakness and isolation of the settings. The muted hues give the film an unnatural quality, making the world feel like it's been drained of life. The occasional burst of warm light in scenes of supposed safety only intensifies the underlying tension, as if the warmth is a fleeting illusion, about to be swallowed up by darkness once again. Setting as a reflection of inner turmoil, the settings, props, and production design are far from mere backdrops. They are intricately woven into the film's narrative and emotional beats. The decaying visitor center and the isolated valley serve as physical representations of the characters' internal states, trapped, decaying, and unable to escape the horrors of the past. The environment becomes a constant reminder of the psychological and emotional toll the characters face. The settings do not simply provide a sense of place. They actively reflect the horror within. In this way, the locations are more than just visually compelling. They are integral to the film's storytelling. They augment the tension, making each step the characters take feel like a descent into madness. The environment feels as if it's closing in on them, and just like the time loop they are trapped in, it feels as though there is no escape. The design of the world mirrors the psyche of the characters, making it a truly immersive experience that enhances the film's atmosphere and emotional weight. In Until Dawn 2025, the dialogue is far more than just a tool for character interaction. It is an extension of the film's eerie atmosphere, psychological depth, and thematic exploration. The script is meticulously crafted, where every line carries weight, whether it be in the form of quiet dread, tense confrontations, or even fleeting moments of vulnerability. What stands out in the dialogue is its subtlety and the way it complements the mood of the story, which fluctuates between suspense, terror, and moments of raw emotional honesty. Character-centric dialogue. Each character's dialogue is carefully tailored to reflect their internal struggles and psychological state. The exposition is delivered organically, ensuring the audience learns about the characters' pasts, motivations, and fears without feeling like they're being spoon-fed information. From the very first interactions, we get a clear sense of each person's personality, whether it's Clover's determination and guilt, Michael's growing desperation, or Ji-young's sarcasm masking her trauma. Every word feels deliberate, building both the characters and the atmosphere, rather than existing solely for narrative purposes. In this time loop scenario, the repetition of lines across different loops emphasizes how the characters' emotional states evolve. Early in the film, the dialogue might seem more playful, with characters making light of their situation. However, as the loops continue, the sharpness of their exchanges begins to fade, replaced by urgency, frustration, and fear. This shift is not just a result of the killer's actions, but also a manifestation of the emotional toll of reliving the same night over and over again. Emotional weight in the dialogue. There are moments where the dialogue takes on significant emotional weight, capturing the deep personal trauma of the characters and their fraught relationships. Clover's guilt over her sister's disappearance, for example, is conveyed through quiet, almost whispered lines as she opens up to her friends. Her repeated admissions of feeling responsible for what happened are so understated yet powerful, weighing heavily on the film's emotional tone. In contrast, moments of pure frustration or fear erupt in intense verbal confrontations. As the group's collective tension builds, arguments flare, and the dialogue becomes raw and cutting. These moments of high tension are juxtaposed with smaller, more intimate exchanges, where characters reach out to one another in fragile moments of vulnerability. It's in these moments of truth, when a character says something unguarded, often in the face of fear or desperation, that the film's emotional depth comes to the forefront. For example, Michael's confession about his regrets and the relationship with his estranged father is delivered with such rawness that it reverberates throughout the rest of the narrative. Sharp wit and dark humor, despite the overwhelming darkness of the situation. Until Dawn finds moments of dark humor and sharp wit, often through the banter of the group. These moments of levity are not jarring, but instead serve as a defense mechanism, a way for the characters to cope with their terror. Ji-young, in particular, often uses sarcastic comments and biting humor to break the tension, but this is more than just for comic relief. Her humor reveals a defensive barrier, one that protects her from confronting the full weight of what's happening around them. The witty exchanges are often bittersweet, almost like moments of normalcy before the horror sets in again. These brief, funny lines give the characters some semblance of agency and control, even if only momentarily. They are layered with subtext, humor used as a mask for deeper vulnerabilities, pain, and fear. It's in these moments that we see the humanity of the characters amidst the chaos, where their personalities shine through even in the most horrific of circumstances. Impactful writing in tension-riddled scenes. When the film delves into its more intense, suspense-filled moments, the dialogue takes on a heightened urgency and intensity, often sparse yet deeply impactful. The quick back-and-forth exchanges between the characters as they try to outwit the killer or figure out their next move are tightly written, leaving little room for filler. Every line serves a purpose, either propelling the story forward or deepening the tension. A simple line like, "We can't keep doing this. We can't keep dying and coming back," delivers so much more than just a statement. It's an expression of the sheer exhaustion and hopelessness that comes with reliving the same nightmare over and over. This line encapsulates the mental fatigue that each character experiences, underscoring the psychological toll of being trapped in a time loop. The moments of silence in the film are just as potent as the dialogue. Characters often react to events with nothing more than an uneasy look or a single word that carries weight far beyond its utterance. The brevity of these lines serves to heighten the tension and suspense, allowing the audience to feel the weight of the situation alongside the characters. Standout lines and defining moments. While the dialogue throughout Until Dawn is consistently strong, certain lines stand out as deeply defining for both the characters and the overall tone of the film. One of the more haunting moments comes when Clover, standing at the center of the visitor center, whispers to herself, "It's all my fault." The line encapsulates the guilt and grief that have been eating away at her throughout the story. It's simple but devastating, and it resonates with anyone who has ever struggled with feelings of responsibility for a tragic event. Another powerful line comes in the final moments of the film, as the time loop begins to crack. A character on the brink of madness says, "This time, we'll make it through together," underscoring the hope and resilience that persists even in the darkest of moments. It's a moment that serves as a reminder of the character's enduring strength, but it's also a bittersweet reflection on the terror they've endured. Even the repetitions of certain lines, especially those said in earlier loops, gain a sense of tragic irony. The more the characters repeat themselves, the more their words begin to carry weight and meaning, reflecting their growing awareness that time, fate, and death itself have become inescapable forces in their lives.
The dialogue's overall impact. What makes the dialogue in Until Dawn particularly effective is its balance of natural, character-driven exchanges with moments of dark reflection and heightened emotion. The characters are real in their imperfections. There are moments of humor, sorrow, regret, and terror, but each line feels deliberate, never superfluous. The dialogue is not just a tool for plot development, it's a means of deepening the emotional resonance of the film and enhancing the audience's connection to the characters. As they are trapped in a cycle of horror, the words they speak, whether sharp or tender, remain etched in the mind long after the film ends. For Until Dawn, 2025, director David F. Sandberg's approach to blending horror and suspense into a high-concept narrative required substantial resources for both the film's technical execution and its atmospheric design. The movie's budget plays a crucial role in how the production quality aligns with its storytelling ambitions, blending practical effects, sophisticated visuals, and immersive audio to create a truly gripping experience. The budget and production quality. With a budget likely in the mid-range for a horror thriller of this scope, it's clear that Until Dawn invested heavily in several key production aspects. One of the standout elements is the cinematography, where Maxime Alexander's craft in capturing the eerie, atmospheric settings, especially the abandoned visitor center, shines. The budget also allows for a seamless blend of practical and digital effects that help keep the visual experience grounded in the film's grim reality. This is essential for maintaining immersion, particularly when dealing with horror tropes like the time loop, where the tension often comes from subtle visual cues and moments of dread rather than heavy reliance on CGI. The production design, especially the choice of locations, also reflects a well-thought-out use of resources. The isolated valley and dilapidated visitor center are perfect metaphors for the character's psychological unraveling, and these locations provide the necessary visual atmosphere for the tension and fear to grow. The film avoids excessive spectacle, focusing on creating a sense of creeping unease rather than overwhelming the audience with overly expensive set pieces. Box office predictions and reception. Given the film's unique blend of horror subgenres and its high-concept plot, one could predict that the box office performance will likely be influenced by a combination of critical reception, audience engagement, and the appeal of the time loop mechanic. If the film's marketing campaign plays up the mystery and the psychological horror aspects, promoting its cerebral nature alongside thrilling slasher sequences, Until Dawn could attract a loyal genre audience. The film's marketing strategy could play a pivotal role in its earnings, especially if it targets horror enthusiasts and fans of Sandberg's previous works, known for blending traditional horror with fresh, psychological approaches. If marketed well, with teasers hinting at the suspenseful time loop without giving too much away, it could create buzz and draw in a broad audience. A successful viral campaign, leveraging the curiosity about the time loop twist, could make Until Dawn a box office sleeper hit, elevated by word-of-mouth and social media discussions surrounding the film's darker, more nuanced horror elements. Influence of audience reception. The reaction to Until Dawn's psychological and emotional depth, as well as its unconventional narrative structure, will likely determine its staying power in theaters. If audience reviews are positive, particularly praising the character-driven storytelling and unique horror approach, it could lead to strong word-of-mouth promotion. This often makes a major difference for films in the horror genre, where long-term earnings tend to be more dependent on audience feedback than traditional action films or blockbusters. If, however, audiences find the time loop too convoluted or difficult to follow, or if the emotional weight of the character's struggles isn't as deeply felt by viewers, the film could face a lukewarm reception, especially in the first week. In that case, despite the intricate narrative and strong performances, the film could potentially see its box office earnings falter after an initial spike driven by curiosity. However, considering the growing interest in psychological horror and films that bend genre conventions, it's possible that Until Dawn will perform strongly, though not necessarily as a runaway blockbuster. Its niche appeal could guarantee its success in the long run, especially with streaming platforms likely picking it up after its theatrical run, extending its lifespan and giving it a second life with audiences who prefer the movie's more cerebral approach.
Box Office Impact of Horror Trends.
The global horror market, especially in the post-pandemic era, has seen films like Sissy and The Invisible Man succeed despite modest budgets. These films showed that audiences are looking for innovative horror experiences, blending psychological depth with genre tropes. As Until Dawn aligns with this trend, its financial success might not require massive ticket sales to be considered profitable. A cult following and consistent interest from horror fans could make it a long-term success, both theatrically and for home viewing markets. If the film leans heavily on psychological thrills rather than gory, visceral horror, it could even tap into a wider audience than traditional slasher films, appealing to fans of more intelligent, emotionally driven horror like Hereditary or Midsommar. However, should the film lean into too much predictable slasher or gore-heavy scenes, it could limit its appeal, leading to more moderate earnings. Overall box office expectations. In conclusion, Until Dawn is likely to perform decently at the box office, particularly if it benefits from a well-executed marketing strategy and draws in horror fans looking for something new. It could be considered a moderate success, gaining momentum on streaming services post-release. Depending on audience reception, the film's box office performance will hinge heavily on its ability to satisfy those looking for fresh takes on familiar horror, as well as those who appreciate character-driven narratives in a genre often dominated by action-heavy plots. Its future may also depend on whether it garners positive enough reception to extend its commercial life in home media.